Alright, we've let the boron on the motor stick and the tail boom dry overnight. So let's take care of some paperwork first. We need to mask these. Motor stick sitting at 141. Motor stick with boron and glue cumulative 141. Now let's just re-tear this and make sure we're getting yeah, 145. Now that the scale's warmed up, call it 145. The blank before we did anything was 143. Well, there it goes to 141. We'll just call it 141. The blank was 143, but that we trimmed some off of the blank when we cut it lengthwise. So, yeah, it's not surprising. Just checking the boron, everything looks good there. Just for safekeeping, we'll slip it back on the mandrel. And then same thing with the tail boom. $189. That's with boron and glue. It was 128 prior. So yeah, last time I was 106 on the blank. I was 128 this time, and my cumulative after boron and seaming was 155, 189. So I'm a little heavier than I'd like, but this wood was a little bit heavier. We had that small patch of tissue here, so it is what it is. Yeah, I went and looked that up, and yeah, that is about 30 milligrams higher than I'd like to see. So, well, it is what it is. I think some of my older tail booms, the wood was around 4 pounds, and this is 5-pound wood. So, yeah, a little bit heavy. Alright, so now we're going to do the inserts on the motor stick. The inserts are to hold the prop hanger and the tail hook. So we'll start with the prop hanger, and what you need to decide is whether you're going to use Harlan style aluminum prop hanger, or if you're going to use a wire wound prop hanger. I wind my own wire prop hangers. I like them. I think they're a little bit stiffer, a little bit surer of a mount. If you use these, just make sure you get some tissue wrapped on them real tight. And rough up the surface a little bit. Need a real good bond with those. So put those all away. I'm going to pause for just... Alright, so the insert's going to look something like this. This is my plastic guide. It's about 1 inch long. You're going to have to adjust the diameter to fit your tube, and it's going to have a step there. This step is where the Harlan prop hanger is going to go, and the step should take it slightly outside the motor stick. For the wire prop hanger, it'll be similar. It'll sit on something like that. So it's going to provide bracing for that wire. And then we'll cut a slot in the Alright, so this is 25,000 sea grain, and it's about an inch wide there, so that'll work just fine. Let's just clean up these edges a little bit. And we want this thing to be vertical grain. So it's going to go across the sheet. We're just going to trim this sheet. And then this thing is about 0.21 inches tall. I use the trick of putting a little bit of Sharpie on the blade and then set that to about 0.21. And then we're going to go to about 0.25 for our step. Better to cut it a little thick and have to sand it down a bit. And the trick when you're cutting cross grain is lay your blade down so it's a real shallow slicing angle instead of tearing it, and then you can drag it across several times, but I'm not holding it up at a steep angle. Okay, so that'll do the job. Alright, so once you get that cut, decide which is going to be your front end. The boron came up a little bit short on this, but that's okay. You don't have a lot of stress at the end. Trying to decide if I want that boron more on the back or the front. I'll leave the boron gap at the back. So this will be my front. Pull the tube out a little bit, but keep the tube in there so you don't mistakenly squeeze it. And then you're going to take the skinny end of this and trial fit it inside your motor stick. And it's just a little bit tight in there. For that, I find a little emery board. Works pretty nicely. Handy tool to have around for sanding small parts. And I'm just barely drag it on there. I don't want to break it off. It's really fragile because of that vertical grain. Alright, that's going in nicely without distorting the shape of the tube. Looks good. Alright, now we will take this and we're going to get a straight piece of 12 or 13 thousandths wire. If I can get one out of the bundle here without making it not so straight anymore. You'll do similar if you're using the Harlan. What I'm going to do is put this through the prop hanger. Make sure you got a nice free swing on that. If you don't, you need to tune it. And then I'm going to lay it on here with the approximate gap I want on the bottom. You need enough room for your prop hook and O-ring to not touch, and you want this rod approximately parallel to the edge of the balsa. So that's what the rod is in there for. I'm going to take a little bit of my 50/50 and just tack this down. Notice I've got my wire sticking out. I'm going to hook my tension wire to that, my truss wire, so that will stick out above the motor stick. That's a pretty generous gap. If you get too tall of a gap between the prop shaft and the motor stick, it puts more of a bending strain on the system. So you just need enough to clear your prop hook or prop shaft, however your hook is made on your propeller. I like a reverse S hook. I do know my last one ended up a little close in this department, so I'm just making sure. Alright, now I'm going to cut a piece of tissue to lay over that to lock in those legs. And I'm going to make the grain go from front to back. Okay, and just a little bit of 50/50 glue on the tissue. Just on the end, and then we'll work our way along. I'm only going to go past the wire maybe a millimeter or two. Need my tweezers. And let's make sure, if you're going to have a thrust line issue, I'd rather have a hair of down thrust than up thrust, but you don't want much. You can always bend the wire to adjust your thrust line. Okay, and then with the tweezers, I'm just going to squeeze the tissue onto the wire and push it down against the balsa wood. I'm going to wet it out with some 10% Duco. Just push it down. Okay, The next step that I like to do on these wire ones is I want to put a little little wedge in there with grain going front to back between, and so this is I think it's 13 thousandths wood. 14. The wire on mine is a 15 thousandths wire, so the 14 thousandths wood is about the same thickness of the wire, or the wire minus the tissue. I should have cut this before I put that all together. So we're going to have to do some trial and error here. I can pick it up by poking this through. And it looks like my angle needs to be a little bit less acute up there. That looks pretty good. We'll go ahead and glue it in and then trim it. So just a dot of 50-50. Slip that balsa spacer in there. Then we'll come in and just trim it flush with the top of the balsa that's already there. Trim it flush with the bottom. Now on this piece I made the grain go from front to back because we want to resist the collapsing of that wire V there. You just use this wire to poke that cut off piece of wood out of there. And I'm going to trim that pretty close there. And now we're going to put another piece of, excuse me, I dropped my straightened wire. I'm going to put another piece of tissue over that to lock everything in. Put a drop of glue on there. Everybody does this slightly different. This is a critical setup here. It holds the full tension of the fully wound motor, and I don't want to risk it coming apart. So I cut the balsa diagonally very close to the wire, and now I'm going to cut the tissue close to that. A little bit more glue on it and wrap the tissue around. So that makes a nice stout front end there. I'm going to just soak that tissue with a little bit of 10% glue. And that's done. So that is our prop hanger insert. And now while we're doing inserts, we might as well do the one for the tail hook. Now, I'm still using this old design. for the tail hook. I know a lot of people have gone to a slightly different design. This is what came with my set of templates, and I've just stayed with it. So let's make sure we have the 25 thou piece, and that's actually a little bit longer, but we'll just make it 1 inch long. I think it was perhaps 1 1/4 inches long. Again, you're cutting cross grain, so lay the blade down. I should be doing this on the little cutting mat to save my blades. A little bit of a contortionist move here. And I'm going to have to switch hands. Get this blade down into the corner and go up to the tip on this angle part. There we go. Alright, a little bit of a rough cut there, but it's going to be too tall anyway, because that was for a 1/4 inch mandrel. So we're just going to lightly sand that down. Get rid of that rough cut. I didn't hold the blade flat enough, or maybe the blade wasn't sharp enough anymore. Alright, so we'll go to the other end of the tube and we'll trial fit this. It's a little large on that end. Fits on that end. So we need to sand the plain end a little bit more. Alright, that fits good. Alright, now we need the piece of wire. We're going to use some, I like to use 13th thou for the rear hook. I don't like it bending on me. So we're going to, this is the bottom, the front of the plane's over here. So the hook's going to come up here and have a 90° with a little tang on the end of it, and that's where your O-ring is going to sit. You come back around here, straight up through the top of the plane, and then a little hook to hook your rigging post to. I usually use the plastic form here as a template, and I'll start with the little tang that holds the O-ring on, so we bend it about 45 degrees. And then just wide enough for an O-ring, and bend 90 degrees. And so far we've got that portion. Okay, this is the one of the more critical. So I'm putting the corner at the top of the, putting the corner at the top of that little mountain, and then I'm going to bend about 45 degrees there and trial fit it. Okay, it's bent a little too much. Trial fit, that looks pretty good. Now we're going to, this little shelf here then gets a 90° to go to the top of the plane. I'm getting a little bit twisted out of plane there, but that's easy enough to fix. Bend that just a little bit more. Trial fit, looking pretty good. Now we need that to be long enough to exit the top of the motor stick and have room to get your tungsten wire under that. Any longer and it's just extra weight. Okay, then we got to cut that wire off. Alrighty, so now we'll trial fit it on the actual piece of balsa wood. Looks pretty good. So now we want to glue that and then wrap it with tissue. So I'm going to get a little bit of wax paper to work on so I don't glue it to my table. Okay, throw a little bit of 50% along the wire and everywhere it's going to contact the balsa. Leave it alone for a moment. Alright, now we're going to wrap along this angle here and along this vertical here with tissue, and you want the grain going around the wire. So if you tear the tissue in each direction, you'll find one way tears a lot easier than the other, and it tears along the grain. Once you've figured out where the grain is on your sheet of tissue, then go ahead and mark it. I've marked it over here. I'm just marking some pieces that will cut here. And we need less than 1/4 of an inch, about 2/10 of an inch wide. And then I think I need to get a little more markings on that so I remember which way the grain's going. I'm going to cut 2 pieces, probably about a little less than 1/4 of an inch long. Dot of glue where we're going to start the tissue. I'm having a hard time holding that tissue. Whoops. Alright, we've got probably 3 to 4 millimeters of stuff hanging off, so we'll trim it down to about 2 millimeters. Wet out the tissue and just wrap it around the wire. Whoops, we just knocked the wire off. Remember, it was just tacked in place. The tissue will lock it in nicely if we can get it in the right place to begin with. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Now we need the other piece of tissue. We'll try the glue on the tissue instead of on the wood this time. And I want to run this up right to the corner if possible. So we really lock in that wire. Just kind of comb it down, and then we're going to take a little bit of our 10% glue. Just wet everything out. Alright, so that should be good. Alright, so now we can start setting up our motor stick to receive those pieces. We're going to go to the front end again, and I want my seam at the top. Different people put it different places. I've always put it at the top. And so we need to mark the tube on the bottom how far back this balsa wood shelf is, because that's going to have room to come completely through the tube. And we're going to come in so that it comes right through the corner there. I'm going to come back about that far. And then the front, just the wire has to stick through. So it's going to come back about, oops, we didn't get a mark. It's going to come back about that far. Got a little bit of loose boron up there. Looks like it's time to mix some more glue. Okay, so on the top we're going to come back to there. Here's the seam, and we're the only thing that has to stick through the top is the wire. So we just need to slit it along the seam. If we look at the front, we can make a mark exactly opposite of the seam, and that becomes our cutout for the balsa wood there. And that is the 25 plus the 14. So it's a little bit of a wide slit, and we'll just work it until it fits good. All right. Oh, that's the mark. All right. We need to go to this side of it. Alright, so we're going to start with the top, and we're just going to come straight along the seam and slit it. Then on the bottom, we're going to slit it twice. Get it as straight as possible. should be able to lift that sliver out of there. Better to have to cut a few times than to cut too much of it away. Okay, oops, there's still a sliver in there. Alright, that looks like it's fitting nicely. The top back to that point, the bottom. If it's teardropping it a little bit, that means you need your slot just a little bit wider. By laying down the blade almost flush with the surface, I can take a thin sliver off and know that the edge is as straight as the blade is. Okay, top into the slot, bottom in the slot. That looks real good there. I'm pretty much centered in the tube. I don't know if you can see that. So everything looks good there. So at this point we're ready to glue that in. Actually, I'm going to double check. Okay, just as I suspected, I've got a little bit of down thrust, more than I'd like to see in there. So this may need to be rebuilt, but better than having to rebuild the whole motor stick. I'm going to see if I can soften this up enough with some acetone to rotate that hook just a little bit. But if it doesn't rotate, then we'll soften it up till it comes apart. Alright, I need my magnifiers. I can see it. It looks like I got something plugged in there. There we go. Yeah, I got a little bit of glue in there the last time I stuck this rod through. Got some glue on the rod. That's not too smart. See if we accomplished anything there. That looks better. Now we've got the rod pretty much parallel to the motor stick. Okay, Now we're going to glue that in there. You don't want to get carried away with the glue, but you want a strong, reliable glue joint. So we are going to prime. Just a little bit of 10% glue along each edge. And then on the front where this step is, you're going to put a little bit of 10% glue on each side. And that's because the two sides of the motor stick will come together there and butt up against it. So we're going to prime those two edges. You're going to prime around the exit there, and then straight back from the slot we're just going to lay a little thin bead of 10% to prime the surface. Alright. Now we're ready to install that. So we're going to put a bead of 50-50 going straight back from each slot, a little bit of 50-50 in the slot. Then slide this puppy in. Squeeze just a little bit vertically so that web joins, and if necessary you can come in with your tweezers and just push down on this the two flaps of the motor stick against that web. You could also do this as a two-step process. Glue the web back in the motor stick and then come back and do these this web here. Not quite sticking there. I don't know if I didn't get enough glue on it or what. I'm going to hold that web down until the flap of the motor stick tube. Hold it down until it sticks. Alright, that got it. Okay, so we've got a little bit of that web protruding up, that's fine, or down. Now we're going to take another piece of this tissue and probably need it about 6 millimeters long. Go ahead and get a little 50-50 on one side of it, and then we're going to lay that onto the motor stick tube between the two legs of the prop hanger. You do the same thing with the Harlan prop hanger, the aluminum prop hanger, and I'm going to use the tweezers to push it into that corner. At this point you can go ahead and wet out that side of the tissue. So you want to definitely make sure it gets into that corner and doesn't form a V there. You want it rubbed down into the corner, and then this flap of tissue is not staying down, so I'll add a little bit more 10% right there on the corner. That looks good. Alright, then we can get our 50-50, wet out the other side of the tissue. Fold it over the top, just work it down with the tweezers into the corner there, and then out along the tube. A little bit of 10% glue where the tissue is looking a little dry. Using the tweezers to spread that glue around, making sure it's in that groove. If your web is flush with the surface, you can just run that tissue straight across. This one's got the prop hanger is hanging out with plenty of room. My last one got a little bit close on me, so more generous this time. Just going to put a dot of glue where the wire comes through. Now you don't need to put tissue across this front here, because we're going to cut that off. Once that's all dry, we're going to cut that off and put an angled piece on there. So we don't need to worry about that at this point. Okay, now we're going to put the tail hook on, and make sure you get it the right way, not upside down. And it's going to be a very similar process, but we have to get it exactly parallel to the front hanger. So on the top seam, we're just going to come in about 2 millimeters. So right about there, and we'll mark the seam. And that's just going to have that wire protruding. Now if we put this mark on the wire, then we're going to mark the bottom where the triangle right here comes back down. So get the wire at the mark and mark the bottom where that triangle comes back down. The rest of it will be inside the tube. So we have to come back to this mark with a slot about 25 thou wide that diamond will slip through. Now, what we want to do is get these marks so when we cut it, it's exactly parallel to the prop hanger on the front. So we're going to take the brass tube out now. We're done with that. And we're going to come in, we're going to start on the seam. So we're going to come in on the seam about in line with that mark we put on the bottom. Then we've got to poke through the top, and we're going to sight along it, and it's not at all. Oh, you know what? I poked it at the boron, not at the seam. Well, it looks like it's at the seam, but we may have a slight twist to our seam, and that's why we poke it with the pin. So somewhere in the first centimeter, we're going to put the pin through one layer and push it so it's bisecting the tube in there, and then get it lined up by sighting down inside the tube. We're going to get it parallel to the front hanger. I find it useful to hold it up to the window and just tweak it until it's parallel, and then just barely prick it through the bottom. And compare it again, and it's slightly off. So I'm going to poke it through the bottom again. Alright, it's between those two pin pricks. So I'm just going to put a line right between the two pin pricks. And that's where we're going to cut our slot in the bottom. So I take the pin back out because I've marked where it was poked through when it was vertical. And make a somewhat straight path going back there. Alright, this pin was not on the seam, so I think I must have gotten a slightly helical seam. Something we tried to avoid, but can't always do it. Actually, we're going to bring the brass tube back now. Hanging the front end off the table so I don't bang it up. And I'm going to lay my knife blade very flat, pull it straight back, move over a little, pull it straight back, and take that sliver out. Now, I eyeballed 25 thousandths, it's probably close enough. I'm going to slip the tail hook in there until the wire is almost touching the back, like that. And now we're going to sight through it again and make sure it's parallel to the front hanger. Alright, so I've got it parallel to the front hanger, and it's real close to the mark I had on there, and I'm just going to cut a slit for that 2 millimeters back to that mark. Double check, and it looks pretty parallel to the front, so everything's good. Now we're going to do the same thing we did on the front. We're going to pull it out. We're going to prime everything with your 10% glue. So the entire top edge, the flat lower part of the bottom edge, and then the sides of the diamond all get a little primer. And then we'll come in here and we'll prime straight ahead of the two slits. This time I'm going to go ahead and put 50-50. Just ahead of the two slits. Just in case I didn't get enough in there, I'm going to add a little on this. I like to put it in the tube so we get a full-length bond. because a lot of that I just put on this web will wipe off as I push it in. Okay, and then push everything in, make sure you get in the slot. Double check, last chance, to make sure you're parallel to the front hold down, just by holding it up to the light and looking through. Alright, and then we can put a little bit of glue on each side here. Okay. Now, one more piece of tissue. You could do it two pieces. You're wanting to lock the diamond to the outside of the motor stick. You can do two pieces, or you can do one piece and wrap it over. I just find it, if you're doing two pieces, they're really small. They're getting down there into the crack, and I just find it easier to work with one piece, but I'll grant you it's slightly heavier. Alright, so we're laying that tissue on, and we end up with a triangle of tissue wrapping onto the motor stick. And actually I bunched up my tissue there. I'm going to see if I can straighten it. If I can, I'll go ahead and use it. Otherwise, I'll cut a new piece of tissue. Wet the tissue out with the 10%. Work it into that corner and down against the motor stick. Now we can come to the other side. Wrap it and down into the corner. All right. Now what I don't like is it ovaled out just a little bit, and I think that means my insert was just a little bit too tall. So I'm gonna see if I can work this in around the insert. Yeah, that helps some. And the top where we slid it for the top hook, it's not coming back together. So I'm going to squeeze that with a little bit of glue on both the top and bottom to try and close up those seams just a little bit. And that's rounding it out nicely. So I think it was just an artifact. Okay. Now that whole back end is going to get bound together with the extension tube, so I'm not too worried right now about that. The front, we're going to cap it, but first we want to put in our rigging post. I have pre-made some rigging posts. I made these out of basswood. I think that's overkill. We had some breakage, so we went to that at some point. But they're tapered from about 50 to about 40 thousandths. I think you can get by with a little less since we're using basswood here. So I'm just going to sand that down just a little bit. You could use some, probably 8-pound or so balsa wood for this, and I think it'd be more than sufficient. I can't recall why we went to basswood. I don't think we had a lot of breakage, but maybe we did. Excuse me. Alright. That bottom end looks a little fat still. I doubt we'll save more than a milligram or so here, but alright, that looks a lot better. I'm down to my last 2 in the bag, and these probably were still in the bag because they're a little bit fat. Alright, now what we want to do is at the fat end or bottom end, I'm just going to spin it as I'm sanding at about a 45-degree angle. I want to make a point on there. Okay. Now I need to find a tool, so I'm going to pause. Alright, back. Now what we want to do is put that rigging post halfway between the 2 rigging points on this motor stick. So we're going to be rigging here and here, the 2 wires where they protrude up, and that is we'll call it 8.6, so 4.3 inches is about at the middle. And then just like the tailpiece, we're going to stick a pin through at our estimated top location, but not stick it through the bottom, and then we're going to sight through the end up to a window. Get that pin parallel to the 2 webs, and looking from the side, we want it perpendicular, going front to back. That looks pretty good. And now we're going to go ahead and mark the location of that. It's leaning back a little, so I'm going to mark a little behind it here. Alright. Now the tool I was looking for is these little needle files. Alright, now I've got to figure out how to open this box. There we go. And these are from Indoor Free Flight Supply. They're really, really handy. And what they'll do is they'll allow you to enlarge a hole without mashing up the wood too bad. So I'm going to start with a fine one, and it will cut with the grain very, very quickly. So I want to get a bigger one. And you want to make sure you go to both sides of your mark so that the post will be centered. And we're only opening up the hole on the top right now. Okay, so that looks like it opened up pretty nicely. You don't want to have extra to fill around there, so take your time, file it, come back to it, keep working it. And now on the bottom, remember we made a point on that rigging post. So we don't want a hole big enough for the rigging post to come all the way through. We just want that point to poke its way through to the outer surface. It's not going all the way through. The reason for that is now we can sight on it again, and it actually looks very good. So there's no adjustment side to side. Front and back looks pretty good as well. So we're just going to leave it there. If you had to make an adjustment in one direction, especially side to side, you can use your file and wallow out that hole a little wider in the direction you need it to go, and still not poke that stick all the way through. If you had wallowed it out so the stick poked all the way through and then had to make an adjustment, there's nothing you can do. You're going to have a hole that's bigger than the stick. So you want it in a tight hole. You want it not coming through on the bottom, just the tip that you sanded into that. Okay, so I primed it in place with some 10% that kind of soaks through. And now I'm going to take my 50% and just put a drop on each side and a drop on the bottom, and that's all it needs. That should lock it in there, except, oh yeah, I got it right. I was going to say it's on the wrong side, but it's correct. It's on the side with the two hooks, which is the top. Alright, now I'm going to just double check it up against the window. Everything looks perpendicular. This looks a little bit tall to me. I like to have them about 1 inch tall out the top. This is 1.25 inches out the top. So I'm going to go ahead and trim that by about 1/4 inch. It's just a little excessive there. Oops, and I knocked it. I should have waited till the glue dried. So I knocked it out of the hole here. I'm going to go ahead and soften the glue that we already put on there with a little bit of 10%. Make sure that's going through that hole. Sight it again. Going to add a little bit more 50-50 up on the top since we disturbed it. And now we're going to leave it the heck alone. Alright, so that gets the most of the parts onto the motor stick. We still need the wing posts. We need to bore on the wing posts. And once all this sets up, we're going to cut the front off diagonally and put a cap on there, and that'll add a lot of rigidity to the front. And then we're going to put the extension on the back after we design an extension. We have to custom fit the extension to the tail boom. So we still have some work to go, but I'm going to let these parts dry a couple hours, and then I'll get back to making the wing posts, putting a cap on the front, and making the motor stick extension. Yeah, that's a complex process. We'll start that tomorrow.